There is a thought that visits you only after midnight. It never comes in the daylight. At 2 in the afternoon, it was just a bill, just a sideways remark from a coworker, just a small, forgettable mistake. But now the clock reads 2 in the morning, and that same thought has grown teeth. It circles, it expands, it fills the entire room until there is nothing left but you and the weight of something you cannot name. Why is the night a magnifying glass for your pain? The answer is not philosophical. It is anatomical. There are 2 structures fighting for control of your mind right now. The first is your prefrontal cortex, the rational guard, the part of you that weighs evidence, calculates risk, and tells you everything will be fine. The second is far older, the amygdala, a small almond-shaped organ buried deep in your temporal lobe that has only one function: to scream danger. And here is the betrayal. At night, the guard falls asleep on the job. Your brain's logic center goes offline to recharge, and it leaves the keys to the entire kingdom in the hands of a primitive, paranoid sentinel that does not reason. It does not negotiate. It only reacts. And then the chemistry collapses. At 3 in the morning, your serotonin hits its lowest point. Your core body temperature drops. Cortisol begins its slow, pre-dawn surge. You are now biologically at your most vulnerable. In this state, your brain is not thinking. It is surviving. It is projecting ghosts onto the walls because it cannot see the flaw. This is not a flaw. This is an inheritance. For 100,000 generations, the dark was the hour of the predator. The rustle in the grass was not the wind. The shadow at the edge of the fire was not nothing. Your ancestors who feared the night survived it. And now that ancient software still runs, flawlessly, ruthlessly, in a bedroom with a locked door and no predator for miles. You are not worried about your future. Your brain is worried about the shadow in the corner of a room that is perfectly safe. But tonight, we dismantle this. We are going to deconstruct the architecture of night panic, circuit by circuit, molecule by molecule. We are going to turn the lights on inside the brain so the monsters have nowhere left to hide. This is not just about sleep. This is about reclaiming your sanity from the midnight hijack. The sun is hours away, and the room is quiet, but your mind is screaming. It is time to understand why. Welcome to the biology of the night. Let us face the dark together. Right now, as you listen to this, there is a part of your brain that is keeping you sane. You do not feel it working. You never thank it. But every waking second of your life, it is standing between you and the abyss. It is called the prefrontal cortex, and it sits just behind your forehead like a quiet, tireless executive running the most complex operation on earth, your conscious mind. During the day, this structure is extraordinary. It is the CEO of your entire psychological empire. Every piece of information that enters your brain, every emotion, every flicker of fear or desire passes through its office before it becomes a decision. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and a flash of rage fires from deep inside your skull. But the prefrontal cortex catches it. It holds the impulse in its hands, examines it, and says, "Not worth it." You exhale. You drive on. You never realize how close you came to losing control because the CEO handled it before it ever reached the surface. This is what neuroscientists call executive function. It is the ability to regulate, to contextualize, to to place a thought inside the larger architecture of your life and judge its actual weight. A bill arrives in the mail. The prefrontal cortex reads it, calculates the account balance, and files it under solvable. A colleague makes a sharp remark in a meeting. The prefrontal cortex cross-references their tone with their history, factors in the possibility that they are simply stressed, and files it under not personal. This is what rational processing looks like. It is not the absence of emotion. It is the governance of emotion. And during the daylight hours, when this region is fully fueled by glucose and oxygen, operating at peak metabolic capacity, it governs beautifully. Problems are just problems. Mistakes are just mistakes. The world makes sense because the CEO is awake, and the CEO provides one thing that nothing else in your brain can offer: context. But the sun sets, and something begins to change. As the evening deepens and the body begins its transition towards sleep, a quiet revolution takes place inside your skull. The prefrontal cortex, which has been running at full capacity for 16 hours, begins to power down. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable neuroscience. Functional imaging studies show a marked decline in prefrontal metabolic activity as the brain enters its nocturnal phase. Glucose uptake decreases, neural firing rates slow. The connections between the prefrontal cortex and the rest of the brain begin to weaken, like phone lines going dead one by one across a dark city. This is prefrontal hypometabolism, and it is not a malfunction. It is scheduled maintenance. The most energy-demanding structure in the human brain needs to recharge. It needs to step away from the controls, hand over the watch, and enter a state of reduced operation so it can be ready for tomorrow. This is necessary. This is healthy, but it creates a window, a dangerous, predictable window during which the most important regulatory system in your mind is functionally offline. The CEO has left the building, the lights in the executive suite have gone dark, and the empire does not stop running. This is the shutdown of reason, and in its wake, something else rises to power. Deep in the temporal lobe, buried beneath layers of cortex, there is a structure that has been waiting all day. It is called the amygdala. It is small, it is ancient, and it has no interest in context. The amygdala is the brain's emotional alarm system, a pair of almond-shaped clusters whose primary function is threat detection. It does not analyze. It does not weigh evidence. It does not consider probability or nuance. It receives a signal, any signal, that even faintly resembles danger, and it pulls the fire alarm every time, without hesitation, without proportion. During the day, this is not a problem, because during the day, the prefrontal cortex sits directly above the amygdala in the neural hierarchy, and every time that alarm rings, the CEO picks up the phone, reviews the evidence, and almost always says, "Stand down." That shadow is just a coat on a chair. That pain in your chest is just tension. That memory from 6 years ago does not require a panic response at 11 in the morning. The amygdala screams, and the prefrontal cortex whispers, and the whisper wins. This is the architecture of emotional regulation. This is what keeps you functional. But now it is midnight, and the whisper is gone. With the prefrontal cortex in metabolic decline, the amygdala loses its leash. There is no CEO to review its alarms. There is no rational filter to intercept the signal before it floods the system. And so, when a thought surfaces, any thought, the amygdala does what it has always done. It treats it as a level 10 emergency. That unpaid bill is no longer solvable. It is proof that your life is collapsing. That remark from your colleague is no longer trivial. It is evidence that you are failing, that people see through you, that you are fundamentally inadequate. A small regret from your past, something you had not thought about in months, suddenly lands in your chest like a stone, and your entire body reacts as if the event is happening right now, in this room, in this bed, in this unbearable silence. This is amygdala hijacking, and it happens not because the night makes you weaker, but because the night removes the one structure that was keeping you strong. And there is another dimension to this darkness that makes everything worse. During the day, your brain has access to what researchers call an external reality check. You see other people, you hear traffic, you feel sunlight. Your senses are constantly feeding your brain with data from the outside world, and that data acts as an anchor. It reminds you where you are, what is real, what is actually happening versus what you are merely imagining. But in the dark, in the silence, that anchor is gone. This is cognitive tunnel vision. Your sensory channels narrow to almost nothing. There is no world to look at. There are no faces to read, no tasks to complete, no movement to track. The only input your brain has left is its own internal narrative. And without the prefrontal cortex to edit that narrative, it runs unchecked. You are not seeing the world more clearly at 2 a.m. You are not having some brutal moment of honesty with yourself. You are experiencing a reality check deficit. You are trapped inside a mind that is talking to itself with no one to interrupt, no one to say that is not accurate, no one to pull you out of the spiral. People often say that the thoughts that come at night feel more true. They are not more true. They are more unfiltered. And unfiltered is not the same as honest. Unfiltered is what happens when the guardrails are gone and the road has no edges and every direction feels like a cliff. And then the body joins the conspiracy. When the amygdala fires its alarm, it does not stop at the mind. It sends a direct signal to the hypothalamus, which activates the sympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate increases, just slightly. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your muscles carry a faint tension you cannot quite locate. These are small changes, almost imperceptible, but your brain perceives them. And here is the catastrophe. The brain interprets these physical cues as confirmation. It feels the heart beating faster and concludes that the fear must be justified. It feels the shallow breath and decides that the threat must be real. After all, the body does not lie, does it? But the body is not lying. The body is simply responding to a false alarm. This is the nocturnal feedback loop. The amygdala fires, the body reacts. The brain detects the body's reaction and feeds it back to the amygdala as new evidence of danger. And the amygdala fires again, harder this time, because now there is proof. The heart beats faster still, the breath gets shorter, and the loop tightens, 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 until you are lying in a perfectly safe room with your pulse hammering against your ribs and a dread in your stomach that has no name, no origin, no logical cause, but feels more real than anything you experienced in the daylight. This is not anxiety in the way most people understand the word. This is the unconditioned response. This is your nervous system executing a program that was written before language existed, before logic existed, before you existed. The amygdala does not know what century it is. It does not know you are in a bed. It only knows the pattern: darkness, silence, reduced cortical oversight, elevated physiological arousal. And the pattern says one thing: you are not safe. And so you lie there, eyes open, mind racing, chest tight, trying to reason your way out of a feeling that was never built on reason, trying to use the prefrontal cortex to calm the storm, but the prefrontal cortex is running on fumes, barely conscious, unable to muster the metabolic resources to override the oldest, loudest system in your brain. You are trying to fight a fire with a flashlight that is running out of batteries. The guard is asleep. The alarm is ringing. Your heart is racing in a silent room. But this is just the beginning of the night's betrayal. As the clock moves toward 3 in the morning, your body's chemistry hits its lowest point, and the shadows begin to speak. In the next chapter, we enter the abyss of the 3 a.m. slump and discover the biological flaw of human despair. There is an hour that does not belong to the day and does not belong to the night. It sits between them like a crack in the architecture of time. The Romans called it the hora mortis. Scandinavian folklore named it the hour of the wolf. Across centuries and civilizations, cultures that never contacted one another arrived at the same conclusion. Something is different about 3 in the morning. Something is wrong about 3 in the morning. And for most of human history, that knowledge lived in myth, in superstition, in the whispered warnings of old women who said the veil between worlds was thinnest when the clock struck 3. They were not entirely wrong. They simply did not have the vocabulary. Modern chronobiology has a name for what happens at this hour. It is called the circadian nadir. It is the lowest point in the 24-hour cycle of human physiology, the absolute basement of biological function. And it is not a vague or poetic concept. It is measurable. At 3 in the morning, your core body temperature drops to its lowest value, sometimes a full degree below its daytime peak. Your heart rate slows to its minimum. Your blood pressure bottoms out. Your respiratory drive weakens. Your reaction time, already degraded by hours of darkness, reaches its worst performance window. If you were to draw a graph of every major physiological system in your body across a full day, each line would dip to its nadir at roughly the same time. Somewhere between 2:30 and 4 in the morning, you are as close to a state of biological shutdown as a conscious human being can be. You are not sleeping, but your body is behaving as though you have already died. And this is not a malfunction. This is the design. Your circadian clock, governed by the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus, orchestrates this decline deliberately. The body must reach this trough. It must descend to this biological flaw in order to perform the maintenance that keeps you alive. Tissue repair accelerates. Cellular waste is cleared. Growth hormone pulses through the bloodstream. The body is rebuilding itself from the inside, one system at a time. And to do this efficiently, it must pull resources away from everything else, away from alertness, away from thermoregulation, away from emotional stability. You are not meant to be awake for this. You are not meant to witness the machine being taken apart and reassembled. But tonight, you are awake, and you feel every moment of the disassembly. The first thing you lose is your chemical ability to cope. During the day, your brain maintains a reservoir of serotonin, the neurotransmitter most directly associated with mood stabilization, emotional equilibrium, and the general feeling that things are, on balance, acceptable. Serotonin does not make you happy. That is a misunderstanding. What serotonin does is far more fundamental. It provides a buffer. It sits between you and the raw emotional weight of existence and absorbs the impact. When serotonin levels are adequate, a problem is just a problem. A memory is just a memory. A regret passes through the mind, like weather, noticed but not devastating. But serotonin has a second life. As darkness falls and the pineal gland receives the signal that night has arrived, your brain begins converting serotonin into melatonin, the hormone that initiates and sustains sleep. This is an elegant system when it works as intended. Serotonin served you during the day, and now it is chemically transformed to serve you at night in a different form. But the conversion has a cost. By 3 in the morning, after hours of melatonin synthesis, your available serotonin stores are profoundly depleted. The buffer is gone. The shock absorber between you and your own thoughts has been chemically disassembled to keep you asleep. Except you are not asleep. You are awake. And you are awake without the one neurochemical that was designed to make waking life tolerable. This is serotonin depletion at the circadian nadir, and it explains something that every insomniac knows but can never articulate. It explains why the thoughts that come at 3 in the morning do not feel like thoughts. They feel like verdicts. They feel like truth. A small financial worry does not present itself as a solvable equation. It presents itself as an unmasking. A relationship tension does not arrive as something to discuss tomorrow. It arrives as evidence of a fundamental failure in who you are. And you cannot push back against these feelings, not because you are weak, but because the chemical infrastructure required to push back has been literally converted into something else. You are trying to feel okay in a brain that has temporarily cannibalized the molecules it needs to generate the feeling of okay. And into this deficit, another chemical arrives uninvited. Beginning in the hours before dawn, the adrenal glands initiate what endocrinologists call the cortisol awakening response. This is a slow, deliberate ramp-up of cortisol production designed to prepare the body for the metabolic demands of morning. Under normal circumstances, this cortisol surge brings alertness, energy, and physiological readiness. It is the biological alarm clock that precedes the actual alarm clock. But the system assumes you are asleep when this process begins. It assumes the cortisol will accumulate silently in the bloodstream and reach its functional threshold just as you open your eyes. If you are already awake at 3 in the morning, the experience is entirely different. The cortisol enters a system that is not ready for it. Your prefrontal cortex is still in metabolic decline. Your serotonin is depleted. Your body temperature is at its floor. And now, layered on top of this vulnerable landscape, comes the slow infusion of the primary stress hormone. It does not give you energy. There is nowhere for the energy to go. The executive systems that would direct it toward productive action are offline. So instead, the cortisol gives you activation without direction, arousal without purpose. It is a car engine revving at full speed while the brakes are locked and the transmission is in neutral. The result is not alertness. The result is dread. A formless, sourceless, vibrating dread that hums in your chest and tells you something terrible is about to happen, even though nothing is happening at all. This is the pre-wake cortisol spike experienced in the wrong context, and combined with the serotonin drought, it creates a neurochemical environment that is almost perfectly calibrated to produce despair. Not sadness, despair. The distinction matters. Sadness is an emotion with an object. You are sad about something. Despair is a state without an object. It is the feeling that something is catastrophically wrong, but you cannot locate it, cannot name it, cannot point to it and say, there, that is the source. Because the source is not in your life. The source is in your blood, and the body has one more betrayal to deliver. During the deep night, your immune system enters its most active maintenance phase. Inflammatory cytokines, the signaling molecules that coordinate immune response, increase in circulation. This is routine biological housekeeping. The immune system uses the low-activity window of sleep to scan for pathogens, repair damaged tissue, and clear cellular debris. Under normal conditions, you sleep through this entirely. But if you are awake, you experience the side effects of your own immune maintenance, because inflammatory cytokines do not stay in the body. They cross the blood-brain barrier, and once inside the brain, they interact with neurotransmitter systems in ways that researchers are only beginning to fully map. What we know is this: elevated systemic inflammation is consistently associated with depressive rumination. It amplifies negative thought patterns. It reduces motivation. It creates a heaviness that is not emotional in origin but feels indistinguishable from deep psychological pain. At 3 in the morning, lying in the dark with depleted serotonin, rising cortisol, and a body quietly inflamed by its own maintenance cycle, you are not experiencing your real feelings about your real life. You are experiencing inflammation-induced rumination in a chemically compromised brain. Your body is doing its housework, and you are interpreting the dust as evidence that the house is falling apart. And then there is the silence. At 3 in the morning, you are alone in a way that the daytime mind cannot comprehend. It is not simply that no one is in the room. It is that no one feels reachable. The social world that sustains you during the day, the voices, the faces, the ambient proof that other humans exist and that you are one of them, has completely vanished. There is no sound of traffic suggesting a city that is still breathing. There is no light from a neighbor's window confirming that someone else is awake. The brain, already stripped of its chemical defenses, now loses its social ones. And this is not a minor loss. Human beings are not solitary organisms. Our nervous systems are calibrated for co-regulation. We literally borrow stability from the presence of others. Their voices lower our cortisol. Their faces activate our ventral vagal circuits. The mere knowledge that someone is nearby modulates our threat detection systems downward. Remove all of that, and the brain draws a conclusion that is ancient and automatic. It concludes that you are alone in the dark with no possibility of rescue. It does not matter that your phone is on the nightstand. It does not matter that people who love you are sleeping one room away. The limbic system does not process facts, it processes signals. And the signal at 3 in the morning is total social absence. The result is a primal abandonment response, a deep, wordless conviction that you have been left behind, that the world has moved on without you, that the silence is not temporary but permanent. And this feeling, layered on top of every other biological collapse happening in this hour, creates the sensation that so many people describe, but so few understand. The feeling that 3 in the morning is not just late. It is the end of something, the bottom of something. A place where hope is not difficult, but physically impossible, because the machinery that generates hope has been taken offline, piece by piece, molecule by molecule, until there is nothing left but you and the dark and the weight. This is the circadian nadir. This is the biological flaw of despair. Not a failure of character, not a revelation of hidden truth, a predictable, measurable, biochemically inevitable crash that happens on schedule every single night to every human being on this planet. Your chemistry has failed you. Your buffer is gone. You are standing at the bottom of a biological pit. But there is a reason why your ancestors stayed awake in this pit. There is a reason why you are scanning the darkness with a heart full of adrenaline and eyes that refuse to close. In the next chapter, we meet the invisible predator and discover the 50,000-year-old ghost that is currently hunting you in your own bedroom. Close your eyes for a moment and forget everything you know. Forget the walls around you. Forget the lock on the door. Forget the city, the electricity, the roads, the laws. Strip it all away, layer by layer, until there is nothing left but grass. Tall grass, stretching in every direction under a sky, so black and so wide, it feels like the ceiling of the world has been removed. There is no moon tonight. There is no fire yet. There is only you, barefoot, breathing, standing in the open darkness of the East African savanna roughly 50,000 years ago, and something is watching you. You do not see it. You will never see it. That is the entire point. The predators that hunted your ancestors did not announce themselves. The leopard did not growl before it struck. The hyena did not pause at the edge of the camp and wait to be noticed. They moved low, they moved silent. They chose the darkest hour of the darkest night, and they came from the direction you were not looking. For nearly 2 million years, since the first members of the genus Homo walked upright on these plains, the night was not a time of rest. It was a theater of death, and the price of relaxation was extinction. This is the fact that modern neuroscience keeps rediscovering in new language. For 99% of human existence, darkness was synonymous with mortal danger. Not metaphorical danger, not emotional danger. The kind of danger that ends with teeth in your throat and your children left without protection. And evolution, that blind and ruthless architect, responded to this pressure the only way it knows how. It selected for fear. It selected for paranoia. It selected for the nervous system that could not relax when the sun went down. The humans who lay on the ground at night and gazed peacefully at the stars were removed from the gene pool, quietly, efficiently, one by one, across thousands of generations, until the only ones left were the ones who could not stop scanning the darkness, the anxious ones, the restless ones, the ones whose hearts beat faster when the light disappeared and whose eyes opened at every sound and whose brains screamed danger even when the night was still. You are their descendant. Every single one of them survived long enough to reproduce, and every single one of them passed this wiring to the next generation, and the next, and the next, until it reached you. Your anxiety at night is not a disorder. It is a pedigree. It is 50,000 years of successful paranoia written into the architecture of your nervous system. You are the product of the ones who were afraid. The brave ones are gone. And the machinery they left you is breathtaking in its precision. When darkness falls and your visual system loses its primary input, your brain does not simply wait for morning. It reorganizes. It shifts resources away from the visual cortex, which now has little to process, and redirects them toward the auditory system. Your hearing does not just remain active at night, it becomes weaponized. The auditory cortex increases its sensitivity. The thalamus, which acts as the brain's sensory relay station, lowers its filtering threshold for sound. During the day, your brain dismisses hundreds of ambient noises as irrelevant. The hum of a refrigerator, the settling of a wooden beam, the distant bark of a dog. These are processed, categorized as non-threatening, and discarded before they ever reach conscious awareness. But at night, the filtering loosens, the threshold drops, and suddenly, every sound that was invisible during the day becomes vivid, sharp, and alarmingly present. This is hypervigilance. This is your auditory system operating in predator detection mode, scanning the acoustic environment with a sensitivity that would be overwhelming in daylight, but was essential on the savannah. A house creaking at 3 in the morning is not louder than a house creaking at 3 in the afternoon. The sound wave is identical, but your brain processes it through a completely different filter. At night, that creak is flagged, amplified, and delivered to your amygdala with a priority tag that says, potential threat. Your heart responds before your mind can even evaluate the source. You flinch before you think. You freeze before you reason. Because on the savannah, the organism that paused to analyze the sound was the organism that did not get a second chance. Your brain is not overreacting to the noise. It is overtuning, scanning the darkness with an acoustic net so fine that nothing, not a footstep, not a breath, not the faintest displacement of air, can pass through without triggering a response. The predator is gone. But the detection system is still running at full power, listening for something that will never come. And your ears are not the only system hunting ghosts. In the 1990s, cognitive scientists identified a phenomenon they called agent detection, and it changed our understanding of how the human brain processes ambiguity. The principle is simple and devastating. When confronted with incomplete visual information, the human brain does not default to neutral. It defaults to life. It assumes that any pattern, any shape, any shadow that even remotely resembles a living being is a living being until proven otherwise. A coat draped over a chair becomes a figure standing in the corner. A curtain shifting in a draft becomes something moving. A pile of laundry on the floor becomes a crouching shape that was not there when you turned off the light. This is not imagination. This is not weakness. This is one of the most powerful survival heuristics ever encoded in a nervous system. Your brain operates on a principle that evolutionary biologists call the false positive bias. It calculates, beneath the level of consciousness, that the cost of 2 errors is radically asymmetric. If you mistake a bush for a predator, you lose nothing. A moment of fear, a burst of adrenaline, a heartbeat wasted on a threat that was not real. But if you mistake a predator for a bush, you lose everything. Your life, your lineage, your entire genetic future. The math is absolute. It is always safer to see a threat that is not there than to miss a threat that is. And so your brain generates false positives constantly, relentlessly, especially in conditions of low light and high ambiguity, which is to say, especially at night, especially in the dark, especially in the exact conditions under which your ancestors were most likely to be killed. You are not paranoid when you see shapes in the shadows. You are executing a detection strategy that kept your species alive for 50,000 generations. The coat rack that looks like a person at 3 in the morning is not a glitch. It is the system working exactly as designed, producing agents in every ambiguous corner, because the one time the agent is real, the one time the shape in the dark is not a coat but a predator, that is the moment that determines whether your genes continue or end. But here is where the ancient system collides with the modern world, and here is where the collision creates damage. You do not live on the savannah. There is no leopard in the hallway. There is no hyena circling the perimeter of your apartment. The predators that this system was built to detect have been gone from your environment for 10,000 years. But the detection system does not know that. It was never updated. It was never informed that the world changed, that the walls went up, that the locks were installed, that the apex predators were driven to the edges of the earth. Your nervous system still runs the old software, flawlessly, every single night. And because it cannot find an external predator, it does something remarkable and devastating. It finds an internal one. Your brain takes the primal terror that was designed for the thing moving in the grass and attaches it to the only threats it can locate: your debts, your failures, your uncertain future. The conversation you mishandled, the opportunity you missed, the relationship that is quietly deteriorating. These are the new predators. They are abstract. They are shapeless. They have no teeth and no claws. But at 3 in the morning, in a neurochemically depleted brain running ancient threat detection algorithms with no external target, they fill the role perfectly. Your unpaid taxes become the leopard in the tree. Your social mistake becomes the hyena at the edge of the firelight. Your future uncertainty becomes the vast, dark grassland stretching out in every direction with no shelter in sight. This is evolutionary mismatch at its most brutal. A system built for immediate physical danger, now aimed at problems that cannot be fought, cannot be outrun, and cannot be resolved by the flood of adrenaline that the amygdala so faithfully provides. And you know what your ancestors did when the dark became unbearable? They built a fire. For hundreds of thousands of years, fire was the single greatest technology against the night. It pushed back the predators. It illuminated the perimeter. It created a circle of safety in which the nervous system could, for a few hours, reduce its vigilance and allow something resembling rest. The campfire was not just warmth. It was a neurological intervention. It told the threat detection system that the boundary was secured, that the shadows had been pushed to a manageable distance, that you could afford to lower the alarm. Fire was medicine for the nocturnal brain. And tonight, when you reach for your phone at 3 in the morning, you are performing the same ritual. The glowing screen is your digital campfire. The light pushes back the darkness. The content, the scrolling, the endless feed of information provides a simulation of social presence, a facsimile of the tribe gathered around the flame, and for a moment, it works. The dread loosens. The shadows retreat to the corners. You feel less alone, but it is a trap because the screen addresses the symptom without touching the cause. It pushes back the external darkness while leaving the internal alarm system fully armed and operational. The moment you put the phone down, the silence returns. the shadows return. And the amygdala, which was never actually calmed but merely distracted, resumes its broadcast with even greater intensity, because now you have added blue light disruption to your melatonin cycle, and the chemical situation is worse than before you picked up the device. The digital campfire does not silence the predator alarm, it delays the confrontation, and every delay makes the eventual confrontation harder. You are the survivor of 1,000 dark nights on the savannah. Your fear is your inheritance. It is coded into your synapses, etched into your hormonal rhythms, woven into the very structure of your perception. But when the predator is invisible, when the detection system scans and finds nothing in the external world to justify the alarm, the brain does something even more terrifying. It turns inward. It starts to project its own internal demons onto the empty walls of the room. It builds monsters from memories. It constructs threats from regrets. It fills the darkness with ghosts that wear your own face. In the next chapter, we face the projection of the shadow and discover why your mind creates monsters when it cannot find them. The room is dark. The ceiling is invisible. The walls have dissolved into nothing. And yet, if you lie still long enough, you will begin to see things. Not light, not real shapes, but forms, impressions. Movement where there is no movement. Figures where there are no figures. Your eyes are open and sending almost no data to the visual cortex. And still, somehow, inexplicably, you are seeing, not the room as it is, the room as your mind needs it to be. This is the first secret of the dark. Your brain cannot tolerate emptiness. It is not built for silence. It is not designed to receive a blank signal and leave it blank. The human visual system processes approximately 11 million bits of sensory information per second during waking life. And when that torrent is suddenly reduced to almost nothing, the brain does not simply idle. It fills, it generates, it reaches into its own archives and begins projecting images onto the void, the way a cinema projector throws light onto a white screen. Neuroscientists call this perceptual filling in, and it is one of the most powerful and least understood phenomena in human cognition. Your brain, deprived of external data, begins manufacturing internal data and presenting it to your conscious mind as though it were real. The dark room is not empty. It is a canvas, and your subconscious is the artist. But what does it paint? This is where we leave the laboratory and enter the depths of the psyche. Because the images your brain projects onto the darkness are not random. They are not noise. They are selected, curated, drawn from a very specific archive that you have spent your entire waking life trying to keep locked. Carl Jung called this archive the shadow, and he considered it one of the most dangerous and most essential structures in the human mind. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, is not a metaphor for evil. It is the repository of everything you have refused to integrate into your conscious identity. Every impulse you have suppressed, every emotion you have denied, every failure you have buried, every version of yourself that you decided was too ugly, too weak, too shameful, too dangerous to acknowledge in the light of day. These contents do not vanish when you push them down. They do not dissolve. They accumulate. They organize. They form a coherent counter-identity that exists just below the surface of your awareness, waiting for the conditions that will allow it to surface. And darkness provides those conditions perfectly. During the day, the ego is in command. The ego is the face you wear. It is the story you tell about who you are. It is maintained by constant social reinforcement, by the reactions of others, by the roles you play, by the mirrors that the world holds up to reflect the version of yourself that you have chosen to present. This maintenance requires enormous energy and enormous input. It requires light, noise, interaction, distraction, the continuous performance of being someone. And as long as the performance continues, the shadow stays hidden, not gone, not resolved, hidden, crouched in the wings, waiting for the stage to go dark. At 3 a.m, the stage goes dark. The social mirrors vanish. The roles dissolve. The audience disappears. The ego, already weakened by prefrontal hypometabolism, already stripped of its neurochemical support, can no longer maintain the performance. And in that moment of structural weakness, the shadow steps forward, not as an idea, not as a concept, as an experience. It takes the form of the thoughts you cannot stop, the memories you cannot escape, the feelings that arrive without invitation and refuse to leave, that surge of guilt about something you did years ago that has no logical reason to surface tonight, that sudden, vivid replay of your most humiliating moment, rendered in excruciating detail as though it happened this morning, that formless conviction that you are secretly terrible, secretly failing, secretly despised by the people who smile at you in the daylight. These are not your rational thoughts. These are the contents of the shadow, released from containment by the collapse of the ego's daytime defenses. And the shadow does not only speak, it appears. This is where the phenomenon of pareidolia becomes something far more than a visual curiosity. Pareidolia is the brain's tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random or ambiguous stimuli, particularly the pattern of a face or a figure. During the day, it is a mild and often amusing quirk. You see a face in the grain of a wooden door. You notice a figure in the clouds. You glance at a rock formation, and for a moment, it looks like a crouching animal. The pattern recognition system flags it. The prefrontal cortex evaluates it. And within milliseconds, you dismiss it and move on. But in the dark, with the prefrontal cortex offline, and the amygdala in command, and the visual cortex desperate for input, pareidolia becomes something else entirely. It becomes terrifying, because the shapes your brain generates are not neutral. They are pulled from the same archive as the shadow. The coat draped over the chair does not just look like a person, it looks like a threatening person. The shadow in the hallway does not just resemble a figure, it resembles a figure that is watching you. The pile of fabric on the floor does not merely suggest a shape, it suggests something crouching, something waiting, something that knows you are there. This is not random pattern matching. This is psychological projection operating through the visual system. Your brain is taking the unresolved fears, the suppressed guilt, the denied anxiety that lives in the shadow, and it is literally projecting them onto the physical environment. The monster you see in the corner of the room is not a product of the room. It is a product of you. It is wearing the face of something you have refused to look at during the day, and the darkness has given it a stage, a shape, and a terrible, silent presence that feels more real than anything you experienced in the sunlight. And this is why the darkness feels so personal. This is why the fear that comes at night does not feel like the fear of an empty room. It feels like the fear of yourself. Consider what happens when you replay your worst moments in the small hours during the day. The brain has access to what psychologists call social buffering. The presence of other people, the demands of tasks, the noise and movement of the world provide a constant stream of interruption that prevents any single thought from dominating the mental landscape. You begin to think about a mistake, and then the phone rings. You start to feel a pang of regret, and then a colleague asks a question. The thought never has time to fully form because the external world keeps breaking the chain. This is not avoidance in the clinical sense. It is the natural function of a social species whose cognitive system is designed to distribute attention across multiple inputs simultaneously. Remove those inputs, and the architecture changes completely. In the silence and the dark, there is no interruption, there is no buffer, there is nothing between you and the thought. And so the thought completes itself. It unfolds fully, with every detail, every implication, every emotional charge that was suppressed during the day when there was not enough silence for it to land. Your worst memory does not just flicker across the surface. It installs itself. It expands. It connects to other memories, other failures, other regrets, forming a network of self-accusation that grows more elaborate and more convincing with every passing minute. You are not remembering your mistake. You are being consumed by it. Because the machinery that would normally interrupt the consumption, the external reality check, the social buffer, the prefrontal override, is entirely absent. The darkness is not scary because of what is in it. The darkness is scary because of what it reveals about what is in you. It is a confrontation chamber, a space in which the ego cannot hide, the shadow cannot be suppressed, and the distance you normally maintain between yourself and your deepest fears collapses to zero. You are not lying in the dark, afraid of the room. You are lying in the dark, afraid of the unedited contents of your own mind. And this is where Jung's insight becomes not just theory but survival strategy. Jung argued that the shadow does not torment us because it is evil. It torments us because it is unintegrated. The guilt that surfaces at 3 a.m. is not a punishment. It is a petition. It is a part of your psyche that has been denied an audience during the day, and the night is the only courtroom where it can be heard. The rage you feel, the shame, the fear, the inadequacy, these are not your enemies. They are the parts of you that need acknowledgement. And the more violently you suppress them during the day, the more violently they will surface at night, because the pressure has to go somewhere, and the dark provides the only available outlet. This is the paradox of nocturnal fear. You cannot defeat the monster in the corner by turning on the light and proving it is a coat. You have to understand why your brain chose to make it a monster in the first place. You have to ask what it represents. What guilt is wearing that shape? What failure is standing in that hallway? What version of yourself is crouching in that shadow, waiting to be seen, waiting to be named, waiting for you to stop running long enough to look at it and say, I know what you are? Because when you name it, the projection loses its power. When you acknowledge the shadow, it does not disappear, but it stops needing to scream. It stops needing to hijack your perception and manufacture threats in every dark corner. The unintegrated becomes integrated. The denied becomes acknowledged. And the cinema screen of the dark which was playing your worst fears on an endless loop, finally goes quiet. Not because the room changed, because you did. You have looked into the mirror of the night. You have seen your shadow. You have understood that the shapes in the dark are not invaders from outside, but exiles from within, fragments of yourself that were cast out by the daylight ego and left to wander the halls of your unconscious until the silence gave them form. But even if you accept your internal monsters, even if you name every shadow and integrate every exiled fragment, there is another trap, one that does not require projection, one that does not require shapes or figures or monsters. In the silence of the room, your own thoughts begin to loop. They bounce off the walls and return to you louder and more distorted, like a voice echoing in an empty cathedral, each repetition adding a layer of fear that was not in the original sound. In the next chapter, we enter the emotional echo chamber and discover why being alone with your thoughts at night is like being trapped in a house of broken mirrors. Think about the last time you walked through a crowded street at noon. There were voices around you, engines, footsteps, the low hum of a city doing what cities do. And somewhere inside your mind, a thought was forming. Maybe a worry, maybe a regret, maybe the beginning of a familiar spiral, but it never completed itself. Because before it could take shape, someone brushed past your shoulder. A car horn sounded, your phone buzzed, the barista called your name, and the thought dissolved. Not because you resolved it, not because you confronted it, but because the world interrupted it. The world broke the chain before the chain could tighten. You have never appreciated how much of your sanity depends on interruption. During every waking hour of the day, you are surrounded by what psychologists call social anchors. These are not dramatic interventions. They are the ordinary, invisible forces that keep your internal world from consuming itself. The sound of a colleague typing, the rhythm of traffic outside a window, the ambient awareness that other human beings are moving through the same space and time as you, handling their own problems, surviving their own anxieties, continuing to exist. These anchors do not solve your problems. They do something more fundamental. They dilute them. They ensure that no single thought, no single fear, no single strand of anxiety can monopolize your entire cognitive field. There is always something else. Always another input, always another signal competing for your brain's limited attentional bandwidth. And this competition, this constant, chaotic, beautiful noise of being alive among others, is the mechanism that keeps your thoughts at a manageable volume. Now remove it, all of it, every sound, every face, every interruption. It is 2:30 in the morning and the room is silent. Not quiet, silent. There is a difference your nervous system knows even if your vocabulary does not. Quiet is reduced noise. Silent is the absence of signal. And in the absence of signal, the brain does not rest. It amplifies. It takes whatever is already inside and turns up the gain, because in a silent environment, the attentional system has nothing to compete with the internal narrative. There is no traffic to dilute the worry, no conversation to interrupt the regret, no task to redirect the spiral. There is only the thought, and the thought, for the first time all day, has the entire stage to itself. This is the end of dilution. This is the moment you meet the undiluted self, not the version of you that exists in the comfortable noise of daytime. The version that exists when every buffer is removed, Every anchor is pulled, and every exit from the internal world is sealed shut. You are alone with the raw, uninterrupted output of your own mind. And that output, without anything to modulate it, is louder than you ever imagined. The first thought arrives and it is manageable. A flicker of concern, a minor tension, something about tomorrow, something about a conversation that did not land the way you intended. Under normal conditions, this thought would surface, register briefly, and be displaced by the next external input within seconds. But there is no next external input. The room is silent. The world is gone. And so the thought does not leave. It lingers. It sits in the center of your awareness like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples begin to spread. This is how rumination begins. Not with a catastrophe, with a thought that has nowhere to go. The brain, confronted with a negative cognition that is not being interrupted or displaced, does something remarkable and destructive. It begins to elaborate. It takes the original thought and asks, "But what if it is worse than I think?" And because there is no external data to answer that question, no reality check, no friend to say, "You are overthinking this," the brain answers itself. It generates a response. And the response is always darker than the question, because the amygdala is feeding the process, and the amygdala only knows how to escalate, so the thought grows. The conversation that did not land becomes evidence that you are losing connection with the people around you. The lost connection becomes a pattern. The pattern becomes a verdict. You are failing. You have always been failing. And now, at 2:30 in the morning, with no one to interrupt the progression, you can see it clearly for the first time. Except you are not seeing clearly. You are seeing through the most distorted lens your brain is capable of producing. Researchers call this the negative feedback loop of rumination, and it operates on a principle that is as simple as it is devastating. A thought generates an emotional response. The emotional response generates a physical sensation. The physical sensation is detected by the brain and interpreted as evidence that the thought is valid. And so the thought intensifies, which intensifies the emotion, which intensifies the sensation, which further validates the thought. The loop has no natural exit point. It is a closed circuit, and in the silence of the night, there is nothing to break it. The thought feeds itself. It grows not because new information is arriving, but because the same information is circulating through the same system over and over, gaining amplitude with each pass. The way audio feedback in an empty room gets louder and louder until the sound becomes a scream, and the loop distorts everything it touches. During the day, your problems exist in proportion. You know this because you can see the world around you. You can observe that other people are going to work, buying groceries, laughing at something on their phones. The scale of ordinary life provides a reference point against which your own difficulties can be measured. Your problem is real, but the world is larger than your problem. There is context, there is proportion, there is the silent, constant reminder that life continues, that your crisis is one event among millions, that the fabric of reality has not been torn by your mistake or your fear or your failure. At night, the reference points vanish, and without them, your brain loses the ability to measure. This is the distortion of scale, and it is one of the most insidious features of nocturnal anxiety. A problem that occupied 5% of your mental bandwidth during the day now occupies 100%. Not because the problem grew, because the bandwidth shrank. There is nothing else in the field. No competing signals, no external scale, no reminder that the world is vast and your problem is contained. In the dark, in the silence, your problem is the entire world. A social awkwardness from last Tuesday expands until it fills the room. An unpaid bill becomes a symbol of total financial collapse. A moment of parental impatience becomes proof that you are damaging your children. These thoughts are not more accurate than their daytime versions. They are the same thoughts, experienced without scale, without context, without the merciful interference of a world that keeps reminding you how small most problems actually are. And your brain, deep in the loop, has lost its ability to test these thoughts against reality. During the day, reality testing is continuous and automatic. You think something terrible, and then you look around and see that the world has not ended. The sun is still out. People are still smiling. The evidence of ongoing normalcy acts as a corrective, a gentle, persistent pressure that pulls catastrophic thinking back toward baseline. Psychologists call this the reality check function, and it depends almost entirely on external sensory input. You need to see the world continuing in order to believe that it will continue. You need evidence from outside your own skull to counterbalance the narrative inside it. At 2:30 in the morning, there is no evidence. The world outside the window is dark and still. The house is silent. There is no data arriving to contradict the worst-case scenario that your brain is constructing with such elaborate conviction. And in the absence of contradictory data, the brain defaults to its most ancient and most reliable assumption. The worst case is the true case. This is the negativity bias, and research suggests it is dramatically amplified in conditions of darkness and social isolation. The brain does not weigh positive and negative possibilities equally. It never has. Negative possibilities receive roughly 3 times the cognitive weight of positive ones, because in evolutionary terms, the cost of ignoring a threat was always greater than the cost of ignoring an opportunity. And in the dark, with no reality check to temper the bias, the scales tip further still. Every thought that passes through the loop is stamped with a negativity premium. Every conclusion is shaded toward disaster. Every memory is edited to emphasize the parts that hurt. You are now standing inside a house of broken mirrors. Imagine a corridor lined with glass on every side, but none of the mirrors are true. Each one reflects your image back to you with a different distortion. One stretches your failures until they are grotesque. Another shrinks your achievements until they are invisible. A third takes the face of someone you love and twists it into an expression of disappointment that was never really there. You walk through this corridor, and every surface confirms the same message. You are less than you thought. Your life is worse than you believed. The things you were holding together during the day are actually falling apart, and the daylight was simply too bright for you to see the cracks. But the mirrors are not showing you your life. They are showing you your life as interpreted by a brain that is chemically depleted, structurally compromised, sensorially starved, and running the most powerful negative feedback loop in its repertoire. The image is not a reflection. It is a fear-induced hallucination projected onto the surface of your own cognition. You are not seeing reality. You are seeing reality through the amygdala's lens, distorted by rumination, amplified by silence, stripped of every moderating influence that normally keeps the picture honest. And this is why the thoughts that come at night feel so true. Not because they are accurate, because they are unopposed. There is no competing signal, no corrective input, no voice in the crowd saying, "Wait, that is not right." There is only the loop, and the loop, and the loop, each repetition adding weight, adding conviction, adding the terrible authority that comes from hearing something repeated in an empty room until it sounds like the only thing that has ever been said. The walls are closing in. Your thoughts are shouting. You can feel the physical weight of the air in the room pressing against your chest like a hand that will not move. And then it happens. Your heart skips a beat. Your breath catches. Your chest tightens around something that is not a thought anymore. It is a sensation, a physical event happening inside your body that your mind did not authorize and cannot control. This is not just thinking anymore. This is a physical invasion. In the next chapter, we face the night panic and discover the terrifying connection between your racing heart and your racing mind. You were asleep. You were gone. The world had dissolved, and your consciousness had sunk into that deep, black, merciful nothing where time does not exist and problems do not follow. And then, without warning, without a dream, without a sound, you are awake. Not gently, not gradually. You are awake the way a drowning person surfaces, with a gasp, with your eyes wide and your chest locked and your heart slamming against your ribs so hard you can feel it in your throat. The room is dark. The room is silent. Nothing has happened. No one has entered. No alarm has sounded. But every cell in your body is screaming that you are about to die. This is nocturnal panic, and it is one of the most terrifying experiences a human being can have. Not because it is dangerous, it almost never is, but because it arrives without explanation. During the day, a panic attack usually has a trigger, a crowd, a confrontation, a thought that spirals. You can point to the cause, even if you cannot control the response. But nocturnal panic has no visible trigger. You were unconscious. You were safe. You were in the one place on earth where threat should be impossible. And yet, your body has launched a full-scale emergency response in the middle of an empty, locked, silent room. Your heart rate has doubled. Your blood pressure has spiked. Your pupils have dilated in the dark. Sweat is forming on your palms and your forehead. Your breathing is shallow and fast, and it feels like there is a band around your chest that is tightening with every breath. You are in the grip of something enormous, and you have no idea what it is or why it has come. The answer begins with carbon dioxide. During sleep, your respiratory system shifts into a lower gear. Breathing rate decreases. Tidal volume drops. The muscles of the diaphragm relax into a slower, shallower rhythm that is perfectly adequate for a body at rest. Under normal conditions, this reduction is seamless. The brain monitors blood gas levels continuously, adjusting respiratory drive to maintain the delicate balance between oxygen and carbon dioxide. But in certain individuals, particularly those with heightened amygdala sensitivity, a vulnerability emerges in the deepest stages of sleep. Breathing slows just slightly more than the system can compensate for. Carbon dioxide levels in the blood rise by a fraction so small that in a calm, waking brain, it would be corrected by a single, deeper breath, automatically, without conscious awareness. But the sleeping brain is not calm. The amygdala, as we have already seen, is not governed by the prefrontal cortex during the night. It is running unsupervised. And when it detects that slight rise in carbon dioxide, it does not make a measured adjustment. It pulls the emergency alarm, because buried in the deepest layer of your brainstem, older than language, older than thought, older than the cortex itself, there is a circuit that exists for one purpose: to detect suffocation. This is the suffocation alarm, and it is perhaps the most primitive and most powerful survival mechanism in the human nervous system. It does not analyze. It does not consider context. It detects a chemical signature that, for millions of years, meant one thing: you are not getting enough air. And it responds with absolute, overwhelming force. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream, not a trickle, a dump. The adrenal glands receive the signal and release a massive bolus of epinephrine directly into your circulatory system. Your heart rate explodes. Your blood vessels constrict. Your muscles tense for action. Your bronchial tubes dilate to force more air into lungs that were never actually deprived. And you are catapulted from unconsciousness into the most intense state of physiological arousal your body can produce. In a room where absolutely nothing is happening, you are now awake, terrified, and your rational mind has a problem it cannot solve. The prefrontal cortex, which has been in metabolic decline for hours, is suddenly called upon to explain what is happening. But it has no data. There was no trigger. There was no threat. There was no dream that it can recall. There is only the overwhelming evidence of the body. The pounding heart, the tight chest, the shortness of breath, the trembling hands, the cold sweat, and above all, the crushing, formless sense of doom that fills the room like a gas. The prefrontal cortex searches for a cause. It scans the environment, dark, empty, safe. It scans recent memory. Nothing. No conflict, no crisis, no reason for this level of activation. And here is where the cognitive trap closes its jaws. Because the prefrontal cortex cannot tolerate an effect without a cause, it is a meaning-making machine, and when it is presented with a state of extreme physiological arousal and no explanation, it does not accept the mystery. It manufactures a narrative, and the narrative, generated by a brain that is chemically depleted, structurally compromised, and flooded with adrenaline, is never benign. It reaches for the most catastrophic interpretation available. I am having a heart attack. Something is wrong with my brain. I am losing my mind. I am dying. These are not rational conclusions. They are the only conclusions a half-awake prefrontal cortex can generate when confronted with a body in full emergency mode and a room that offers no explanation. And each conclusion makes everything worse. The thought, "I am having a heart attack," sends a new surge of fear to the amygdala. The amygdala responds with more adrenaline. The adrenaline accelerates the heart further. The faster heart convinces the prefrontal cortex that the initial interpretation was correct. The confirmation generates more fear, more adrenaline, a faster heart, a tighter chest. This is the misinterpretation loop, and it is one of the most vicious cycles in human neurology. The body generates a symptom. The mind misreads the symptom as evidence of catastrophe. The misreading amplifies the symptom. The amplified symptom reinforces the misreading. And within minutes, A minor fluctuation in blood chemistry has become a full-blown medical emergency in the mind of a person whose body is functioning exactly as it was designed to function. But there is another layer to this assault, one that begins not in the bloodstream, but in the thalamus. The thalamus sits at the center of the brain like a switchboard operator in an old telephone exchange. Every sensory signal that enters the brain, with the sole exception of smell, passes through the thalamus on its way to the cortex. During waking hours, the thalamus is a precise and efficient router. It receives input, categorizes it, and sends it to the appropriate processing region. A sound goes to the auditory cortex. A touch goes to the somatosensory cortex. A visual signal goes to the occipital lobe. The system works beautifully because the thalamus is calibrated by the constant stream of external data. It knows what is coming from outside and what is coming from inside, and it routes accordingly. During sleep, this calibration degrades. External input drops to near zero. The thalamus is now routing almost exclusively internal signals, the body's own maintenance noise, muscle twitches, digestive movements, shifts in blood pressure, fragments of dream imagery that flicker through the visual system like static on an old television. Under normal conditions, these signals are suppressed or integrated seamlessly into the sleep cycle. But when the suffocation alarm fires and the brain is jolted into sudden wakefulness, the thalamus is caught in transition. It is still partially in sleep mode, still routing internal signals as though they are the primary data stream. And so a muscle twitch in the chest wall is routed to the cortex, not as a benign spasm, but as a potential cardiac event. A fragment of dream, a flash of imagery that has no narrative and no meaning, is delivered to the amygdala as though it were a real visual threat. The remnants of a digestive contraction are interpreted as abdominal distress. The brain is reading its own internal noise as external danger because the thalamus has not yet recalibrated to the waking state. This is thalamic misrouting, and it is the reason nocturnal panic feels so physical, so invasive, so impossibly real. You are not imagining the sensations. The sensations are genuine. Your heart is genuinely pounding. Your chest is genuinely tight. Your hands are genuinely trembling. But the cause is not what your brain thinks it is. The cause is a temporary misalignment between the alarm system and the routing system. A biological stutter that occurs in the gap between sleep and waking, amplified by an amygdala that has been running unsupervised for hours and a prefrontal cortex that is too depleted to provide the one thing that would end the crisis immediately: context. And this is where understanding becomes the medicine. If you have ever experienced this, if you have ever woken in the dark with your heart hammering and your mind screaming that something is catastrophically wrong, there is a sentence that can begin to break the spell. Your heart is not broken. It is following orders from a confused brain. This is not a platitude. It is a precise description of the neurological event. The adrenaline dump that woke you is a biological event, not a mystical omen. The pounding in your chest is the predictable result of epinephrine binding to cardiac receptors, not evidence of organ failure. The feeling of doom is the emotional signature of amygdala activation in the absence of prefrontal regulation, not a premonition of actual doom. Everything you are feeling has a mechanism. Everything you are experiencing has a circuit, and circuits can be understood. Circuits can be named, and in the naming, in the simple act of recognizing the adrenaline dump as adrenaline and the suffocation alarm as a false alarm, and the catastrophic thoughts as the desperate narrative of a prefrontal cortex grasping for explanations in the dark. The loop begins to weaken. This is biological grounding. It is the practice of meeting panic not with resistance, but with recognition. Not fighting the heart rate, but understanding it. Not arguing with the doom, but identifying its chemical signature. The body is not your enemy in this moment. The body is an instrument being played by a confused conductor. And when you recognize the confusion, when you see the mechanism behind the music loses its power to terrify. The heart still pounds, but you know why. The chest still tightens, but you know the cause. And knowing, in the neurological sense, is the prefrontal cortex coming back online, reconnecting to the amygdala, restoring the leash, whispering stand down into the chaos. Your body has survived the storm. The adrenaline is fading. The heart is slowing. The room is reassembling itself around you, walls and ceiling, and the familiar shapes of furniture emerging from the dark, like landmarks after a flood. But as you lie there, exhausted, wrung out, staring at the ceiling with the residue of chemicals still humming in your veins, the next phase begins. The what-ifs. Your mind, no longer in emergency mode but still untethered from daytime logic, starts building, constructing, architecting elaborate scenarios of everything that could go wrong tomorrow, next week, next year. It writes scripts, detailed, vivid, cinematically precise scripts in which you fail, you lose, you are exposed, you are ruined. In the next chapter, we face the art of catastrophizing and discover why your brain is obsessed with writing horror scripts about your own future. Your head touches the pillow. The lights are off. The day is over. And the director takes the stage. You did not hire this director. You did not audition for this role. But the moment the room goes dark and the last distraction falls away, a part of your brain picks up a script and begins to shoot a film. And the genre is always the same. Horror. Not the kind with monsters and jump scares. The kind that is far worse. The kind that stars you in exquisite, granular, hyper-realistic detail. Your brain begins constructing a scenario in which everything you are afraid of comes true. The presentation tomorrow goes catastrophically wrong, and your colleagues watch in silent, pitying disgust. The relationship you are trying to hold together finally collapses, and you are left standing in the wreckage, wondering what you could have done. The financial situation you have been managing by inches suddenly gives way, and the floor beneath your entire life disappears. The scenes are vivid. The dialogue is precise. The emotional charge is so intense that your body responds as though the events are actually happening. Your jaw tightens. Your stomach drops. Your breathing changes. You are lying in a perfectly safe bed, watching a movie that has not happened, may never happen, and yet your nervous system cannot tell the difference between the simulation and reality. This is catastrophizing, and it is not a personality flaw. It is one of the most powerful and most misunderstood survival mechanisms in the human brain. Your brain hates uncertainty, not dislikes it, hates it with a biological intensity that rivals hunger and thirst. Uncertainty, from the perspective of a survival-oriented nervous system, is an open variable, an unresolved equation, a door that could have anything behind it. And an organism that cannot predict what is behind the door cannot prepare for it. So, your brain does what it has always done when confronted with the unknown. It simulates, It runs scenarios. It takes every unresolved question in your life and generates the worst possible answer. Not because it believes the worst will happen, but because if you are prepared for the worst, everything else becomes survivable. This is the logic of catastrophic thinking. It is a preparation engine disguised as a torture device, and it activates most powerfully at the exact moment when you have the fewest resources to manage it. Because this is not just the amygdala working alone, this is an entire network. Neuroscience has identified a constellation of brain regions that activate whenever you are not engaged in a specific external task. It is called the default mode network, and it is one of the most metabolically active systems in the human brain. During the day, when you are focused on work or conversation or navigation or any task that demands directed attention, the default mode network is suppressed. It hums quietly in the background, waiting. But the moment the task ends, the moment the external demand is removed, the default mode network surges to life, and its primary function is self-referential thought. It thinks about you, your past, your future, your identity, your relationships, your place in the social hierarchy, your unresolved conflicts, and your unfulfilled goals. During the day, this self-reflection is moderated by the executive control systems of the prefrontal cortex. The default mode network generates a thought about your future, and the prefrontal cortex evaluates it, assigns it a probability, places it in context, and files it appropriately. But at night, the executive control is gone. The prefrontal cortex is in metabolic decline. The default mode network is fully active, and the result is a hijacking so seamless that you do not even realize it has occurred. The network that was designed to help you reflect on your life has become a simulated disaster laboratory, running worst-case scenarios on an infinite loop with no executive oversight to evaluate their accuracy. You are not thinking about tomorrow, you are simulating failure. You are not planning, you are rehearsing catastrophe. And every rehearsal feels more real than the last, because there is nothing in the system to flag it as a simulation. And the simulations are distorted by a cognitive error so fundamental that it shapes everything your brain produces in the dark. During the day, your prefrontal cortex performs a function that is invisible but essential. It calculates probability. When a worry surfaces, the executive system quickly and automatically assesses the likelihood of the feared outcome. What are the chances this will actually happen? The answer is almost always low, 1%, 5%, possible but not probable. And that assessment, that simple probabilistic judgment, diffuses the worry before it can escalate. The event is possible but unlikely, and the brain moves on. At night, this calculation fails. The prefrontal machinery that assigns probability is offline, and without it, the brain makes a catastrophic substitution. It replaces probability with possibility. If something can happen, the nocturnal brain treats it as though it will happen. The distinction between a 1% chance and a certainty collapses entirely. Your brain cannot tell the difference between unlikely and inevitable. And so every scenario the default mode network generates is experienced with the full emotional weight of a guaranteed outcome. You are not worried that you might lose your job. You are experiencing the loss of your job as a foregone conclusion. You are not anxious that the relationship might fail. You are grieving the failure as though it has already occurred. The future has not happened, but your brain is already living in the wreckage. And fueling this distortion is one of the most well-documented biases in cognitive science. The availability heuristic is the brain's tendency to predict the future based not on statistical likelihood, but on the most vivid and emotionally charged memory it can retrieve. It does not ask what usually happens in situations like this. It asks, what is the scariest thing I can remember? And it uses that memory, that single, vivid, disproportionately terrifying data point, as the template for its prediction. If you once saw a colleague humiliated during a presentation, that memory becomes the prediction engine for your own presentation tomorrow. If you once experienced a devastating loss, that experience becomes the assumed trajectory of every relationship you enter. The availability heuristic does not care about base rates. It does not care about the thousands of presentations that went fine or the millions of relationships that survived their rough patches. It cares about the most emotionally available catastrophe, and it projects that catastrophe onto your future with absolute conviction. This is probability distortion combined with memory bias, and in the dark, in the silence, with no executive system to correct the errors, it produces a vision of the future so bleak and so detailed and so emotionally overwhelming that it feels like prophecy. And here is perhaps the cruelest trick of all. You believe the worry is useful. There is a seductive illusion embedded in catastrophic thinking, and it is this, that by worrying, you are doing something, that the mental rehearsal of disaster is a form of preparation, that if you think about the worst-case scenario enough times, you will somehow be ready for it. This illusion keeps you engaged with the loop. It gives the rumination a sense of purpose. You are not spiraling, your brain tells you. You are planning. You are not torturing yourself. You are being responsible. And so you stay in the loop, convinced that the next cycle will produce a solution, that if you just think about it one more time, you will find the answer that resolves the fear. But worry does not produce solutions. Worry produces more worry. It is a closed system that consumes metabolic energy without generating output. Every cycle of the catastrophic loop burns glucose and produces cortisol and activates the stress response and delivers absolutely nothing in return. No plan, no resolution, no actionable insight. Just another lap around the same track. Each lap slightly more exhausting and slightly more hopeless than the last. You are spending the most precious hours of your biological recovery on ghost fights, swinging at shadows that dissolve the moment you try to grab them and reform the moment you turn away. And recognizing this is the first step toward breaking the cycle. There is a technique that cognitive behavioral researchers have refined over decades, and it is deceptively simple. It is called decatastrophizing, and it works not by eliminating the fear, but by restoring the one thing the nocturnal brain has lost: proportion. It asks 3 questions. First, what is the absolute worst that can realistically happen? Not the fantasy, not the Hollywood version, the actual, concrete, real-world worst case. Second, what is the best that can happen? The version where things go right, where the outcome is favorable, where the fear was unfounded. And third, and this is the question that the 2 a.m. brain cannot access on its own, what is the most likely outcome? What usually happens in situations like this? What does the base rate suggest? What would a calm, well-rested, fully resourced version of you predict? The most likely outcome is almost always invisible at 2 in the morning. It lives in the middle of the spectrum, in the undramatic space between catastrophe and miracle. It is the version where the presentation is imperfect but adequate, where the relationship hits a rough patch but continues, where the financial pressure is real but manageable. It is boring. It is uncinematic. It does not make for a good horror script. And that is exactly why the nocturnal brain skips it. The default mode network is not interested in the probable. It is obsessed with the extreme. And the only way to bring the probable back into view is to deliberately, consciously, almost mechanically force the question: what is the most realistic version of this scenario? You will not feel the relief immediately. The emotional system does not update as quickly as the cognitive system. You will ask the question, and the answer will feel hollow, unconvincing, too small to stand against the towering catastrophe that your brain has constructed. But this is expected. The purpose of the question is not to generate instant calm. It is to plant a seed of proportion in a landscape that has been stripped of it, to reintroduce the missing variable, to remind the system that probability exists, that base rates exist, that the vast majority of the scenarios the Midnight Director is producing will never make it off the page. The horror movie is not a prediction. It is a draft, written by a frightened brain in a dark room with no editor and no budget for rewrites. And you do not have to accept the draft as final. You have dismantled the script. You have seen the director behind the curtain. The projector is still running, but the images are losing their sharpness, their authority, their unbearable weight. The horror movie is over, but there is one final challenge. The sun is still hours away. The room is still dark. The silence is still complete. And the question remains, how do you actually live with the night? How do you stop fighting the darkness and start inhabiting it? How do you turn the hours between midnight and dawn from a cage into a sanctuary, from a theater of dread into a space where the mind can rest without being consumed? In our final chapter, we reach taming the night and learn the ultimate secrets to making peace with the shadows forever. You have walked through every corridor of the night. You have stood in the control room and watched the prefrontal cortex power down. You have felt the amygdala slip its leash and howl at shadows that were never there. You have descended to the biological floor at 3 in the morning, where serotonin runs dry and cortisol seeps into a body that was never meant to be awake for its own maintenance. You have met the 50,000-year-old predator that still hunts you in a locked bedroom. You have seen your own shadow projected onto the walls. You have been trapped in the echo chamber where thoughts multiply and distort until a whisper becomes a scream. You have survived the midnight panic, the suffocation alarm, the adrenaline dump that turned your own heartbeat into an enemy. And you have watched the Midnight Director construct horror films about your future using nothing but fear and silence and the availability heuristic. You have seen everything the night can do to you, and you are still here. The dark has not changed. Not a single molecule of it is different from the darkness that terrified you before this journey began. The room is the same. The silence is the same. The clock still moves at the same indifferent pace toward a dawn that feels impossibly far away. Nothing out there has been altered, but something in here has. Something behind your eyes, something in the space between the stimulus and the response. You now carry something that your amygdala cannot confiscate and your cortisol cannot dissolve. You carry understanding. And understanding, in the neuroscience of fear, is not a comfort. it is a weapon. Every piece of knowledge you have absorbed across these chapters has done something physiologically real inside your brain. When you learned that the prefrontal cortex enters metabolic decline at night, you gave your prefrontal cortex a framework for recognizing its own limitations. When you learned that serotonin is converted to melatonin and that the emotional buffer disappears by 3 in the morning, you created a cognitive label for the emptiness that used to feel like despair. When you learned that the suffocation alarm can be triggered by a minor fluctuation in carbon dioxide, you built a mental model that can intercept the catastrophic misinterpretation before it spirals into panic. Each fact, each mechanism, each named circuit is now a tool. And tools do not eliminate the darkness. They allow you to navigate it. This is not metaphor. This is the observer effect applied to your own neurology. The act of understanding a process changes your relationship to that process. A heart pounding in the dark with no explanation is terror. A heart pounding in the dark because you recognize the adrenaline dump triggered by a carbon dioxide fluctuation detected by an oversensitive suffocation alarm in a brainstem that has not been updated since the Pleistocene is something entirely different. It is still uncomfortable. It is still unwelcome, but it is no longer unknown, and the unknown is where panic lives. The moment you name the mechanism, you have evicted panic from its only home. But knowledge alone is not enough. You need a practice, a skill that operates in real time, in the dark, in the silence, when the thoughts come and the body reacts and the old machinery begins its familiar escalation. And there is one skill that decades of clinical research have identified as the single most effective intervention for nocturnal distress. It is called cognitive diffusion, and it is simpler and more powerful than almost anything else psychology has produced. Here is how it works. A thought arrives. Let us say it is the thought that you are failing, that your life is not where it should be, that something essential is broken and cannot be repaired. Under normal nocturnal conditions, this thought would land in your mind and immediately become your reality. You would not experience it as a thought. You would experience it as truth. You would fuse with it. The boundary between you and the thought would dissolve, and you would become the failure, become the brokenness, become the catastrophe. This is cognitive fusion. It is the default state of the unsupervised mind, and it is the engine that drives every spiral, every rumination loop, every catastrophic scenario that has ever kept you awake. Cognitive diffusion reverses this process with a single, precise intervention. When the thought arrives, you do not fight it. You do not argue with it. You do not try to replace it with something positive. You label it. You say, silently, to yourself, I am having the thought that I am failing. That is all. 7 words. But those 7 words create a distance that did not exist before. They insert a space between you and the cognition. They establish you as the observer of the thought rather than the subject of the thought. And in that space, in that tiny luminous gap between the thinker and the thought, the fusion breaks. You are no longer the failure. You are the awareness that is noticing a thought about failure. And awareness cannot be threatened by what it observes. This is not denial. You are not pretending the thought does not exist. You are not suppressing it. You are not pushing it into the shadow where it will only return with greater force. You are doing something far more radical. You are allowing the thought to exist fully, completely, without resistance, while simultaneously refusing to become it. You are watching the horror film without climbing into the screen. And the moment you become the observer, the amygdala loses its grip, because the amygdala responds to fusion. It responds to the seamless identification with the threat. When you diffuse, when you step back into the position of witness, you activate the very prefrontal circuits that the night has been suppressing. Not fully, not with the power they hold at noon, but enough to create a biological buffer between the alarm and the response. Enough to keep the rational guard standing, however drowsily, at the gate. And once you have the skill, you can build the ritual. What I am about to describe is not sleep hygiene. It is not a list of tips about avoiding caffeine or dimming your screens, though those things have their place. What I am describing is a mental closing ceremony, a deliberate, sovereign act of preparing the mind for the transition from day to night. You have learned that your brain will scan for threats in the darkness because it was designed to scan for predators on the savannah. You cannot stop the scanning, but you can redirect it. If the threat detection system demands a target, give it one that serves you. Direct it inward, not toward fear, but toward inventory. Before you close your eyes, scan not for what might go wrong, but for what held today together. Not grand achievements, not milestones. The small things that the default mode network will never select on its own, because they are not dramatic enough to trigger the availability heuristic. The meal that was warm, the conversation that was honest, the moment you paused at a window and noticed the sky. These are not platitudes. These are attentional redirections. You are taking a system that is built to hyper-focus on threat and giving it a deliberate assignment. Scan for evidence of safety. Scan for evidence of continuity. Scan for proof that the structure of your life, however imperfect, is still holding. And then, when the lights go out and the silence begins, let the breath become the anchor, not controlled breathing, not forced patterns. Simply the act of noticing the breath as it moves in and out, the way you would watch waves arriving at a shore without trying to change their rhythm. The breath is the only physiological process that operates both involuntarily and voluntarily. It is the bridge between the autonomic nervous system and conscious awareness. When you place your attention on it without trying to alter it, you are performing an act of extraordinary neurological significance. You are activating the ventral vagal complex, the branch of the parasympathetic nervous system that signals safety. You are lowering the amygdala's activation threshold. You are telling the most ancient parts of your brain, in the only language they understand, that the perimeter is secure, that the predator is not coming, that the fire does not need to be rebuilt tonight. This is the sanctuary protocol, and its power lies not in complexity, but in sovereignty. You are not begging your brain to let you sleep. You are not negotiating with the amygdala. You are assuming command of the only variables that are within your control, your attention and your breath. And when you assume command, even gently, even imperfectly, the entire system responds. Not instantly, not dramatically, but with the slow, deep shift of an organism that recognizes it is no longer in danger. And here is the truth that has been waiting behind every chapter of this series. The silence of the night is not your enemy. It never was. The silence is the rarest environment left in the modern world. A space without demands, a space without performance, a space where the mask of the persona, the face you wear for colleagues and strangers and even for the people you love, can finally be set down. You have spent every waking hour of every day curating an identity for an audience, and the night is the only time the audience leaves. This is why the night feels so raw, not because the darkness adds something terrible, because it removes something protective. It removes the distraction. It removes the noise. It removes the 1,000 small performances that keep you from hearing the sound of your own existence. And that sound, the sound of you without the filter, is not something to flee from. It is something to witness, not with judgment, not with the amygdala's interpretation, but with the quiet, steady gaze of the observer who has learned that thoughts are not truths, that feelings are not facts, that the body's alarms are ancient echoes in a modern room, and that the shadow on the wall is just a part of yourself that has been waiting patiently in the dark for you to stop running and turn around and look. The night is not a cage. It is the only room in your life where no one is watching, where no one is measuring, where the relentless performance of being a person in the world is temporarily suspended and something deeper, something quieter, something that does not need an audience or a script or a role to justify its existence can finally breathe. You are not broken for being awake at this hour. You are not weak for feeling the weight of the dark. You are a biological organism carrying 50,000 years of survival programming through a world that no longer requires it. And the fact that you are here, that you have listened, that you have walked through every mechanism and every circuit and every chemical cascade that the night can throw at a human mind, means that you are no longer a passenger in this process. You are the one who understands. You are the one who names the alarm and watches the panic dissolve. You are the one who sees the shadow and recognizes your own face. There was a moment at the very beginning of this journey when you lay in the dark and a thought visited you. It had teeth, it circled, it filled the room, and you did not know why. Now you know. Now every mechanism has a name, every circuit has a map, every ghost has been unmasked. The sun will rise, the world will return, the noise will fill the space again, and the persona will climb back onto the stage, and the performance will resume. But for now, in this breath, in this silence, in this darkness that is no longer an enemy but a room you have learned to inhabit with sovereignty, you are safe. Not because the danger has passed, because you have become the kind of mind that knows the difference between danger and the memory of danger, between a threat and the echo of a threat, between the dark and what the dark pretends to be. Close your eyes or leave them open. It does not matter anymore. The night belongs to you now. Good night, sovereign soul.